Hello friends, I'm David Vos, and today is October 12th, 2016. It's good to see everybody today. Driving down the road here, and I had some thoughts going out to Texas. Well, you know, for all of human history, mankind has had this infatuation with a certain question. Everybody in every culture and in every nation has asked the question, why are we here and how did we get here? Well, for some reason, this question has eluded the greatest philosophers and minds, scientists. No one has ever had a simple equation to prove that we exist. Well, there was Descartes, who said, I think, therefore I am. But that's not sufficient in and of itself, because a lot of people have said, well, just because I'm thinking doesn't prove that I am. And so one has to say, well, okay, how do you further explain that to prove that that is true? And that's not a real good equation. It's just it's a little simple play of words, but we need to get down to an actual equation, just like E equals MC squared, that scientists can go over, and any sane thinking person can say, yes, that's true. Not only does it prove that we exist, but that we've always existed, or that there is a God, or whatever. We need to know. So, I've got some thoughts on this, and I think this is the first time in human history that this has ever been put down. And I think this is the first time in history that this has ever been put down in a simple equation that will prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that we exist, God exists, the universe exists. Now, the first thing I'm going to point out is that the question of why am I here, or am I here, is a very simple question that really is nonsensical. And I'm going to prove that through a system of, just like if you're trying to understand high complicated math, no human being is capable of understanding physics and calculus and algebra and all this stuff without knowing how to work the equation. Just take, for instance, simple multiplication. You can't keep track in your mind how many times 568,000 times 458,000. Your mind couldn't calculate that without a method. So we carry the 1 and bring down the 3, and we have a certain method. We can arrive at the conclusion, and we know that it always works. So it's the same thing with existence. It's very complicated, and it's hard to imagine whether or not we actually exist, whether or not there is a world that's here, or it's all an illusion, or what. Are we real? Is this world real? Is there really a God? Now, we can put this down in an equation, and we can prove it, but we've never been able to know what that equation is. So I'm going to start off with a few little kind of half equations, little thoughts that will focus your attention into a place where you can grasp what I'm saying. I always start off by saying there are no variables in zero. This is a fact. It's an equation, actually, because we know, we can prove with mathematics that zero has no variables. You cannot cut zero in half and get two halves of a zero, because half of 0 is still 0. See, this is an equation that we can prove. 0 times 0 is still 0. 0 minus 0 is 0. 0 times 0 is 0. There are no variables in 0. So therefore, if we could prove that anything exists in this universe, we can prove that anything exists, then we prove that everything exists. And this is where I'm going to go with this. I'm going to prove that to you. But number one, what we've proven with there are no variables in 0 is we've proven that everything that exists now did not come from nothing. And therefore, since it exists, it must have always existed. Now that's a fair and real equation. If it exists, anything that does exist now, and you and I know, I think most of us know that we exist, that our friends exist, the world exists, flowers exist, our house exists, everything exists that we see around us. And we can go into it later as to whether that's all illusion or something. But everything that is in the world, whether we understand it correctly or not, everything that actually is here had to have always been here, because it could not have come from nothing. And he said, well, it could have come from something else and evolved. Well, then that's not true, because let's say that we can carry it all the way back to a pollywog. You still don't know where the pollywog came from. The fact is that anything that exists couldn't have come from nothing. So something had always existed. Now, maybe that something has changed forms throughout time, and the things in the form in which we see it is changed. But something has always existed. Now, that doesn't have to be God. We haven't proven that yet, but we're going to prove that. Now, the other thing that I always talk about is that there is an infinity. There is an endless thing. As long as you can come up with anything that does exist, you can call that a whole. See, a loaf of bread exists. All right, there's a whole loaf of bread. You take a couple of pieces out, now you've got less than a whole. A pie, let's just talk about a pie. Cut the pie in half, you got 2 halves. Now you can cut anything that exists in half endlessly. Now you can prove that mathematically by saying 1 cut in half is 2 halves. Cut it in fourths, you got 1/4. Cut it in eighths, you got 1/8. And you cut 1/8 into 1/16. And you can add to that 1/32, and you can go forever into an infinity and add zeros onto that for eternity. So that even though it gets down to a piece or a particle that is so small you can't see it, it still exists. And any particle that exists, if it does indeed exist, and if it started off as something that exists, then that thing that existed before, cut in half, exists now in 2 halves. So we can go infinitely. And basically what we're saying is that anything can be broken into an endless number of pieces. And what we're going to prove here today is that each and every one of those pieces is an identical piece to the one that it was a part of. Now, in at least in many respects, and we can prove in every respect, and I know it's going to blow your mind, but everything that exists has a top and a bottom. And so the thing that existed before in its whole form had a top and a bottom. Cut it in half, and each half still has a top and a bottom, a left and a right. Now, these are the kinds of, we could go on and on and on with this, and we don't want to, get too confused in all of this tanglements, but what I want to show you at this point is that by saying that something exists, we prove that there is a top and a bottom, a left and a right, just by the fact that anything exists. But here's what I'm about to tell you. If you can prove that anything exists, you not only prove that there is a left and a right, and a top and a bottom, an inside and an outside, but we can also prove that there is a solid. If it has, one thing you have to understand is that the word solid is a relative term, because even my hand or a rock isn't necessarily solid in some ways, because certain things can go through it if it's of a higher vibration. They've shown that the molecules in a rock are very sparse, and so something in a different wavelength can actually go through the rock. So it isn't solid to some things, and other things it is. It's a relative term. But anything that has a top and a bottom, a thing, has to have some sort of solidness to it. It has to be identifiable. You've got to be able to, if it's a thing, you've got to be able to understand that it exists, and there has to be variables. Now, we've already picked out some variables like top and bottom, left and right, inside, outside. But if it has all of that, a shape, then if I told you to go over there and touch it, see, if it exists, you've got to be able to touch it. Even if you don't actually register it in the physical realm, it still has some sort of vibration or wavelength. It can still be sensed. Now, if you sense it in any way, you can describe that sensation. Now, let's say it's so solid, and you and I touch it, and we say, well, it feels rough. Well, the fact that it's rough proves that there are existence. It proves that there are other things that are smooth. Because you couldn't say it was rough without the understanding that there is such a thing as smooth. So the fact that what you're sensing has some sort of sensory description, variable, proves that all the other variables are true. For instance, let's say that I'm going to look at it and I'm going to tell you what it looks like. And you say, well, what color is it? Well, if there's any one color that I can describe a variable of color, that proves there are other variables of color. If I say, well, it's red, well, then that proves that there's a distinction between red and something else. It could be blue, it could have been green, but it wasn't. It was red, and I told you it was red. So by the fact that we have anything, we now prove that everything has a top and a bottom, a left and a right, an inside and an outside, a shape, a form. It may be solid, it may be liquid. We've proven that it has some color, and that it is of some consistent roughness or smoothness. There are an endless number of variables to any and everything. Now, I said endless. That means that everything that exists proves the existence of everything else. So if you can prove that you exist, whether you do it the way Descartes told us, I think, therefore I am, or whether you use other variables, just the fact that, somebody might say, well, my existence may be an illusion. Maybe I'm, dreaming. Well, if you're dreaming, you're still existing. You have consciousness, some sort of consciousness. Your very consciousness is a thing. It is a thing that has variables, right? If I say I am conscious, then I have to say, what are you conscious of? The fact that you're conscious means that there are other things to be conscious of. And we do the whole equation all over again. So basically, the universe exists because you exist. And everything that's in the universe exists by virtue of anything else. Therefore, we have proven the existence of all things forever in all eternity, including yourself. Just a thought, friends. This here's David Vos, and I'm going to go ahead and sign out and try to get this loaded here pretty quick. We'll see you guys tomorrow.